church is not a building. It is a gathering of people. That's always what it's been. And it's not just one gathering of people. It's a life and community together. And so if you're going to church, if going to church to you means spending 1 hour in a building on Sunday mornings and walking out and that's it, you're not really participating in church anyway.
Today's podcast is sponsored by my friends at Acts 29, and they have an exciting opportunity coming up that I'd like to tell you about. Acts 29 will host 4 advanced conferences this year. Advanced conferences are training and assessment events that bring together new and aspiring church planters, dynamic thinkers, and proven church planting practitioners. The next advanced conference is in Omaha, Nebraska, May 1st through 3rd, with other events in Dallas and Portland later this year. These events will include breakouts for a wide variety of church leaders, including women who are pastors' wives or ministry leaders. To learn more and register for one of these advanced conferences, visit acts29.com/advance23. That's acts29.com/advance23. Hey everybody, welcome to All Things. It is the month of March, Women's History Month, and so every All Things episode this month we are focusing on a different issue pertaining to women. And so all of the guests this month have been so sweet. I'm so looking forward to bringing this conversation to you. I am talking to Ericka Andersen, who just released a book called Reason to Return. And the subtitle is Why Women Need the Church and the Church Needs Women. So I love the church, as you guys know, and I love ministering to women and my friendships with women as well. So I'm thrilled to have this conversation. Ericka, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on to talk about the book.
Yes, we're excited. So why don't you start by introducing yourself to the listeners? What do you do professionally, personally? What are you writing? What's your life like right now, Ericka?
Yes, definitely. Well, I live in Indianapolis, Indiana with my husband and my 2 kids that are 4 and 7. I am a freelance writer and / freelancer, other things as well, digital media, social media, kind of jack of all trades type of person, but I work for myself and it's a lot of fun to keep a lot of different balls in the air. But my real love is writing. And so I'm a columnist at World Magazine. I get to do some reporting for Christianity Today on a regular basis and then various other places. And then, of course, the book just launched. So that's been a lot going on. And so that's kind of my little life in a nutshell right now.
Yeah, I feel like if we weren't talking about women in the church, we could be talking about how you wear all those different hats. You are busy. And I see your name in so many bylines in so many different places, which has got to be fun because you write for secular outposts, you write for, Christian magazines. You've got your hands in a lot of different places, which I think is so good.
Yeah, it's been really cool to write for some of the secular outlets. I mean, I feel like I went through a couple of years where I was really getting a lot of opportunities, and I felt like God really was giving me this platform. I mean, the first article I wrote for the Wall Street Journal was about church, and I was just like, this is so cool. Like, I'm writing about church for this massive audience, and honestly, it was the genesis of this book that really where that article came from, and so it's amazing that I have been given this gift and these opportunities, and I don't take it for granted, and I love it.
Yeah, that is awesome. I love to just see women walking in their gifting and just feeling the pleasure of God as they exercise those gifts and that He's allowed it and made it happen. And not that it comes easy. I know better than that to think that for a second it is easy, but it's sweet to see when the Lord allows His daughters to flourish in different ways. Okay, so reason to return. Let's turn our conversation there. You say that 16 million women have left the church over the last decade, which I find really, really striking. So can you start us off by telling us why they're leaving, where they're going, what is going on?
Yeah, the number is probably a little higher now since
Sure.
COVID. I mean, I think those stats were really like up until 2020. So probably a little higher. And it's one of those things where it's like such a staggering number that it's hard to sort of, who is this woman? Who are these women that are leaving? And I think a lot of people, when I talk to them about this, their minds immediately jump to, oh, well, it's politics or it's deconstruction or deconversion. And I do think, of course, that there are those things play a part in this. But from what I read and researched, it seems to me, and what the research shows, is that it's more about women feeling stressed out, overwhelmed, misguided. They don't have direction. Like life is heavy. And there's just been all kinds of different contributing factors that have made them not feel that church is something they need in their life. And that goes along, I think, with the fact that we are increasingly a post-Christian culture. And so going to church is actually less normal than it ever has been. And less than half of Americans attend church on a regular basis. I can't remember the exact stats. I want to say it's something like 37% for the general population. And so like that, it's I think that it's more practical things that actually have solutions. And so when I saw these numbers, and I saw specifically that women were starting to leave at much faster rates than men, which is the first time in history this has ever happened.
Wow.
I was very intrigued by
Yeah.
this. And what I thought was so interesting is that women are leaving, but they're still saying that they highly value their relationships with God. And so when I heard that, I was like, these are people that, like, low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better term, like these are people that can come back, and we just have to speak to them and invite them back in a way that their hearts feel it and hear it, and is a message that they're willing to listen to.
Yeah, I love that you're a researcher at heart. I feel that too. I just love to dig and get to the bottom of sociological data, what's really going on. So, listeners might not be aware that that data that you just gave us, that more women are leaving faster than men, is really staggering. Because I know from my own research, since the time of Jesus, since Jesus revolutionized the world and the early church was born, more women than men have been attending church ever since. More women than men are
Yep.
Christians, right? So for you to say that more women are leaving than men, that does really blow me away. What do you account for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's related because we're talking about America here, so we're talking about
Sure,
North
sure.
America, not like the whole
Right.
world. As you probably know, like Christianity is really exploding in some other places, like in Africa and places like that. But for America, I think part of it is relating back to the post-Christian culture
Yeah.
thing. I think also there's been just this uprising of this religion of self.
Mhm.
We've got our gurus like Glennon Doyle Melton and Brene Brown and all of those, and they may have, I'm not saying they say all bad things. I mean, they have helpful things to say from time to time, but people are looking for purpose and meaning and something to hold on to, and these sort of secular gurus offer like a replacement for religion in
Mhm.
a way, like it's almost like its own religion. And I think people are trying that and they're seeing that. But what's happening is it's not sustainable
Mhm.
because you can't worship yourself.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. You can't go to yourself for what you need from like the one true
Yeah.
God. And so I think that those, and this is just my anecdotal opinion, but I think a lot of those things are sort of running their course.
Mhm.
People are doing it, they're loving it, they're like untamed, yes, but then they're realizing like, oh, that's actually not so great because it's grounded in basically
Yeah.
nothing. And so I think that there is an opportunity right now to speak to a lot of those people that are burnt out, that are, they know there's something more, but they just haven't been able to get it together or find the energy to figure out what to do
Yeah.
next. But we know they think it's important,
Mhm.
and that's really big.
Yeah, this is super interesting, and I just want to be like preach over here because you are speaking my language. I love to talk about this age of self and how it's not going well. We are not
No,
serving ourselves well when we seek to be self-serving, right? Um,
it's very toxic.
it is, yeah, and it's so attractive at first, right? I mean, anybody who's listened to Glennon Doyle Melton or Brene Brown, you can't help but feel energized, pumped up, excited. But I totally agree with you. I think that research bears this out as well as all of us are picturing a dozen friends right now, including ourselves, and just recalling how it falls short and that message does not really satisfy and it does not really sustain us. It turns out we make really terrible gods because we are limited human beings.
Yeah, I used to do this like yoga class online during the pandemic, and the lady would always close the class and she would always say, um, And remember, everything that you could ever want or need is right here inside of you.
Oh
And I
man.
wanted to be like, no, that's actually not true. I mean, unless you're talking about the Holy Spirit in your heart,
Yeah.
but
Uh,
I don't think that's what she meant. But I'm like, even if you were completely non-religious, like we all need people outside of ourselves. God created us for community. And so like even, you and I, of course, believe like that church community is the ultimate community that he wants for us. But even in a non-religious sense, like since we are created in God's image, like we all have that desire for community in some form or fashion. And we can obviously see that in rates of mental health and
yeah.
how everything plays out when you become an isolated person.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Ericka, what is your story with church? Did you grow up in church? Are you a new churchgoer? What's your relationship like?
Yes, I am a lifelong churchgoer, but I don't want people to, say, "Oh, she doesn't know. She's been going for," But because what I talk about in the book, and I've said many times, is that if you've been going to church for any amount of time, like we've all experienced hurt at the hands of church.
Yeah.
We have all had relationships that have been not good, or experiences that were very misguided or even abusive. And
Mhm.
it's all there. I've been going to church since I was basically born, and I've been to a variety of churches, big and small. Been through a couple different youth groups, college ministries, all the things. And church for me, despite some of the negative things that I do go into in the book, has always been this real grounding in my life.
Mm.
It's like I can just say when I move somewhere new. I remember like I moved to Washington, D.C. When I was just out of college. And it's like the first thing I did, I didn't know anybody. First thing I do, like I got to find a
Yeah.
church. And I don't know what it was in me that did
Mm.
that, but that's what I did. And every time I move somewhere new, it's the first thing I
Mm.
do. And I think it's just because when I walk into a church, it's like I feel like I'm home. And I know that I'm surrounded by, family and believers. And there's something so sweet and kindred about, being in surrounded by other believers. And oh, what was the I had a thought. It just Oh, yes, yes. Okay, so this is the thing that I love so much, and you maybe have read this before, but I read it in Sam Allberry's book about church, where he says that churches are embassies of heaven on
Mm.
earth. And so I'm like, when you walk into a church, like you're not on earth anymore. Just like when you're in China and you're at the U.S. embassy, like you're not in China
Mhm,
anymore.
mhm.
And so there's something. I mean, I really think it's one of the coolest things that I've ever
Mm.
heard. That when you walk into church, you're really walking into
Yeah.
heaven. And like, whoa.
Yeah.
So I just love that.
Yeah, I do too. You have really painted a good and true and a sweet and exciting picture of church. Do you get the sense, Erica, that most women feel today, that American women, that church is just another option on a buffet of good things? Like, I can go to my workout class, I can take my kid to their soccer game, can go to brunch with the girls, or I can go to church. Like, what is going on with that? Because
Hmm.
I kind of had that sense.
Yeah, I do get that feeling. I mean, I think people kind of look at church and they're like, well, I've been praying and like I'm reading this devotional, or, do I really need to do this? Like, I don't really like religion. I just want to, have my relationship with God and I'm a good person. But I think that's because a lot of people have a misunderstanding
Mm,
of what church is.
mm,
So they think of church as this building that you go to for an hour on Sunday
mhm.
mornings, and you listen to a preacher and you come and you go and you drop your kids off and yada yada. But and probably a lot of listeners know that church is not a building. It is a gathering of people. That's always what it's been. And it's not just one gathering of people. It's a life and community together. And so if you're going to church, if going to church to you means spending 1 hour in a building on Sunday mornings and walking out and that's it, you're not really participating in church anyway.
Right.
I think Sunday morning is a part of church, or whatever day your services are. But it's so much more than that. It's relationship, friendship. It's providing for one another. It's a safety net.
Mhm.
It's feeling like you have people on your
Yeah.
team. It's a place where you learn and grow together. I think people miss or don't recognize the fact that God uses other people to teach us more about
Yeah.
Him. And the purpose of church is not, like getting all your needs met. The purpose of church is to get to know God better and glorify him. And he has told us we get to know God better through community, through that church community with other people. Like those perspectives give us new perspectives of God. Like we all have our own relationship with God. And when we meet together with others, we get to see a part of God that we can't see ourselves. Like he shows up in almost it's like a 3D way or something within that church community. Like the Holy Spirit is there in a different way than he is, by ourselves on a hillside writing in our journals. And that's just true. You can't have that same experience. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what church should be and what it can be if we kind of educate ourselves a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. We do just sort of narrow it down to a Sunday morning, drive-by experience where we go and consume if we like it, maybe skip if we don't. Yeah, and something that you sort of reminded me of is something my husband always says. He's a pastor, and he always says, our faith is meant to be personal, but not private. So yes, I have a personal relationship with Jesus, but it's not just me and Jesus, as you said. It's me and the body and the gifts and the expression of Christ in my brothers and sisters. And so we were really made to thrive by participating in this community, not just on Sunday morning, but in many ways throughout the entire week. And just, it is a family, and we flourish best when we meet together.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, I've been really focusing on this, the verse, Jesus saying, and go make disciples and to the ends of the earth. And you cannot make disciples alone.
No, you can't.
You really can't. You're not making disciples by yourself. And so, it is the church that God uses to save people.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read Acts, it's like, and the church added to their numbers. And it's through the witness of the church that people are drawn to Jesus. And so when you're not participating in that, if you're not making the church great, making God famous through the church, we are missing out on so many people that, that's how they're going to hear it. And so I think people also forget about that like, this is not just about you.
Yeah.
Like if you are a Christian, and that's who this book is for, people who would say, yes, I'm a Christian, then you've got to care about like the bigger picture. Like there's such a bigger story being written, and like you're a part of it, and God has given you a gift a gift and a part to play in this big story. And part of that is being in the church, and that he's working that to, the good of the greater story, something that we can't necessarily see and won't necessarily see here on earth.
Yeah. It seems so popular right now to believe and to say and just to sort of spout off like, well, I love Jesus, but I don't like the church. That seems to be, I don't know, maybe the prevailing belief or the cliche thing that people say to each other. Has somebody ever said that to you, and how did you respond?
Well, I've definitely heard it. I don't know if anyone said it directly to me. I'm probably like, oh, don't say that to
Don't
Ericka.
say it to her.
I've written this book. But I understand an experience, but the church, like to write off the local church based on experiences you've had at one particular church or with particular people, I don't think that really makes sense. Now, I do want to talk about, I do talk in the book about how we have to process and we have to heal and we have to and get your therapy, go through the process. You might need to take some time away as you're dealing with it. But I think it's like people are getting stuck. Like in every other area of life, you're supposed to go to rehab, and you're supposed to go to therapy, and you're supposed to heal and find new relationships and, grow as a person. But a lot of times when people are talking about church hurt and religious trauma, it's like, they're like, well, I was hurt, and so that's it. And I'm going to be bitter about it forever. And that's not healthy in any regard, no matter what you've been through. And I don't want to, I feel like sometimes it's hard. I don't want to come across as overly harsh, because I think that everybody's story matters. And I think what you've been through matters, and I want you to process it. But I also, I want you to know that there are unhealthy people and unhealthy churches, but there are a lot more healthy churches and healthy people. Of course, there's no perfect people, in any relationship, whether it's with your spouse or a friend or a parent, you're probably going to get hurt. You can't expect not to get hurt. It's just not possible. But I think we've got to be realistic about the way that life is on earth. Like, it's just not going to be perfect. And yeah, I had another thought, but it just escaped me.
I do appreciate how you're sort of balancing these things. Of course, you want to meet people where they're at. You want to acknowledge abuse when it's taken place. You want to acknowledge what has been hurt because we know that's real. And at the same time, you're so right. And I don't know that I've ever really thought about it that way, Ericka. That in every other area of life, we're like, no, you rehab, you rehabilitate, and you get back in the game. If you had a bad experience with a teacher, you don't write off education. If you had a bad experience with a coach, you don't write off sports. If you had a bad friend, you don't write off friends. We tend to go back into things. And yet with the church, it's different. I'm not sure why that is. You've given me some food for thought here.
Yeah, well, one of the things I talk about is this idea of the church of your past doesn't have to be the church of your
Mm-hmm.
future. And so if you had a bad experience at a mega church or something, don't go to one of those. Like, because if you walk back into that very same setting, like even if it's a different church, you might be overwhelmed with sort of psychological responses. I write in the book about this concept of schema, which is a psychological term, which basically it's like your brain shortcuts because of trauma. Your brain will shortcut back to what happened to you in a similar circumstance, and it's like a mechanism of protection, which is great if you're actually in a bad circumstance, but it's not great when you're not.
Yeah.
But it tricks you into thinking, oh, this is unsafe, I can't be here. And so you have to work against that. You have to sort of rewire your brain to let it know that you're safe now. And so I say, try something different. I say, try a small church, or if you're not ready to go to a building, like, go somewhere else, meet with people, create your own space where you need to be right now.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible doesn't say that you have to go to a building with a cross on the corner. It says when two or three are gathered. So gather your two or three and pursue God with a pure heart, and he will eventually lead you to where to that place where you're going to feel more comfortable, maybe in a larger group. He doesn't want you to go somewhere where you feel scared.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can always remember that God is on your side. God loves you. And he wants you to get back to a place where you feel comfortable. And that may take time and it may look different for everybody. So give yourself the freedom to do it differently, but don't give up altogether.
I love how you're talking about this because I feel like it's fuel for conversations that we can each have with the friends in our life who are in that position. I think sometimes for myself personally, wanting to err on the side of grace and care and validation, I might shy away from those conversations. But you're absolutely right. The Lord will never leave us and he will never forsake us. And his plan A, as you have said, is his body. It is the church. So then how can I sort of bring those together as I speak with compassion and kindness to a friend who's been hurt and encourage her to take some baby steps, just to do one more thing this week that will encourage her healing and encourage her journey back into the fold, and into that community. So that is helpful. I think we can apply that to some conversations that we're having in our real life. And can we do that for a second? Like, I'm thinking there are some scenarios that we all kind of experience, and I would love to hear kind of what you would say. These answers don't have to be long. Maybe we can like kind of pepper through them, but like, what
Okay.
if, give us some help, Ericka, like for having a conversation with a friend who has left because of maybe differing politics. In 2020, she was like, I'm out of here because these people's politics are crazy. What would that conversation look like if you were trying to woo her back to church?
Well, I've heard that a
Yeah.
lot. I actually am sort of have one foot in the political world. I lived in Washington, D.C. for 10 years, so I'm still pretty sort of like ear in there. So I have heard that a lot. And I think the first thing I would say is my church didn't have any problems with politics. We didn't talk about politics. We stayed focused on scripture. And so what I can tell you is that not every church is like the one you experience. There are many churches across the country that don't talk about Donald Trump. They don't talk about Joe Biden. That is sort of like a peripheral issue. Obviously, we want to be good citizens and vote on policies and things that we believe in that are good for people and good for our communities. That's important. But we live in America. There are so many churches. And I know that it's hard work to find one that you like. But I would argue that it really is worth your time to take the time to explore your community and find a space that you feel comfortable in. And if a space that brings up politics isn't that for you, you don't have to go there. Nobody's forcing you to go anywhere. It's your choice. And there are lots of wonderful communities within church bodies, and none of them are going to be mad at you if you go to a different one.
Yeah. So another one that I hear frequently, although I think it's something you don't hear until you're sort of in a close relationship or an intimate friendship with somebody, is just the feeling of shame. A friend who feels like she can't go back to church because she feels ashamed. What would that conversation look like?
Hmm. Well, for me, being a very open person, I would probably share my own story.
Mhm.
I got plenty of sinful things I've done and, things in the past that I regret. And I have no problem sharing those with people. Um, I even have a story that I've been holding on to that I haven't really told anyone because I feel like someday God is going to introduce me to a woman that needs to hear
Mhm.
it. And I think vulnerability is not to be like overly cliche. I know that's like a very popular cultural term, but I really think vulnerability is the answer. And at my church, I have tried to lead the way. I go to a pretty small church, but I've tried to lead the way in vulnerability. I have spoken about my sobriety in front of the church, my eating disorder. I'm very open on social media. So if you were to start following me, you would very quickly probably feel comfortable with me. I think what it does is you become safe.
Mhm.
People know that I've put my story out there. People know that they can come to me and tell me something really
Mhm.
intimate because I've told them something really intimate. And so I think the more that churches, and I think they could do a better job of this, I think the more that churches can bring that vulnerability into the services and the regular aspects of life, they should.
Mhm.
So people sharing their stories, their testimonies, like the church leadership, like talking about something that's happened to them or something that they're struggling with. The pastor should not be this guy that looks like, he has this perfect everything together kind of life. I mean, I think that's one issue I talk about is that there are certain churches where I think the pastor becomes this, sort of celebrity
Mhm.
or like godlike
Mhm.
figure. And it's like, no, we need more than the pastor being up there and
Mhm.
sharing. We need everybody. So yeah, I'm going on,
No,
but
that's so good. I love that. And I will just say to the listeners to absolutely give you a follow online because, as I said to you before we started recording, you sharing about your sobriety has been tremendously encouraging to me and to my community. I have a number of really dear friends who are pursuing sobriety right now, and I was able to point them to you. You share stories sometimes or reels where you talk really vulnerably, and I've sent those to these friends and said, look at Ericka and the way that she's sharing. And so you have served the larger church, not just your local church, with that vulnerability. And I love that idea of all of us just being more willing to be real with one another. I think church would feel so much more intimate and safe and like the place it's meant to be, that God made it to be, if we would be transparent with one another. So thanks for that.
and
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I don't know if this is where I got this idea, but when I was growing up in church, in my home church as a kid, there were certain Sundays, and my pastor it would just be sort of like a word from God. He would be like, you know what? I just want to hear from people today.
Mm,
What's going on?
interesting.
And
Yeah.
people would go up and take the mic, and they would share like the deepest
Mm,
struggles of their heart with the entire congregation. And I remember one couple, and I don't know why I remember these particular ones, but this one couple came up and they were like, well, we just want to confess that we have not tithed for a whole year.
wow.
Or, somebody's talking about, I have been struggling with addiction,
Mhm.
or, whatever it may be. And those made such an impact on
Yeah.
me. And it's so funny. This is so full circle. Last night I was on a live radio show, and I get this message on Facebook, literally like as soon as I hang up. And it is my pastor from when I was a kid who I don't keep in touch with. And he said, I was just listening to the radio and you were on and you were talking about, and I was like, what? And I was just like, God, you're so cool.
Yeah.
This is it was a random like radio station in Georgia, I think. No, St. Louis. I don't remember what the location was, but somehow it was on his radio and he heard it. And he's the guy, that gave me this vulnerability idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to tell him that. I haven't even gotten to tell him that.
I love that.
But I did love this particular pastor.
Yeah.
And so very cool that he randomly heard me on the radio last night.
I do think vulnerability breeds vulnerability. The more you do it, the more you get it, and the more other people catch it, and it kind of just builds on itself. Okay, final question, Ericka, before we close out here. What would you say to the church or to church-going women? What is one thing we can be doing better in terms of inviting women back and giving them reasons to return?
Well, I would say the number one way that people end up going to church is through a personal invitation from a friend. That's old school evangelism, I guess. But I know that it's hard to invite people to church because I don't do it very often. Because I don't, especially today, because you're like, I don't want them to be offended or, whatever. But I would say being intentional about just finding those opportunities, especially if your church has something special going on. Like I know that my church and a lot of churches in this area do a lot of things for kids, or, we used to have we would do a date night at our church where anyone from the community could drop their kids off and they could go for a date night and we'd give them a little date kit. And so I think it's like the second or one of the most popular ways people end up coming to a church is through sort of one of these adjacent activities, like a class or something like that. So I think looking for those opportunities. And then lastly, I would just say, this is a big one, your church and yourself being involved in the community. There's a book I recommend by Jonathan Brooks. It's called Church Forsaken. I don't know if you've heard of it. But it's a beautiful example of a church that really just integrated itself with the community in this most beautiful way. And, it's like these people the community members weren't coming to the church, but as the church began to give into the community, they saw and respected that. And so I think as much as your church can be, giving back to the community in all kinds of visible ways, I think that's going to draw people in, and because what I find sometimes when I talk to somebody or, and it's like, and I'm like, yeah, like I volunteer here, or like, we donate here, or we're doing this project or whatever. People are like, almost like, oh, you're not like other Christians.
Right.
And I'm kind of like, but actually I am.
Right.
Like Christians are extremely generous if you look at the statistics. And so anyway, it's personal relationships that make all the difference. So you become the face of Christianity, and you become, that introduction to Jesus by being there for people without an expectation. And I think that you just have to be intentional about it.
Love it. We're going to end on that note. That is such good truth, Ericka. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your research, a reason to return. I will be linking all of this in the show notes, as well as where people can find you, your website, the book, and everything else. But thanks for writing this, and thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to All Things. Thanks for listening to All Things with Jen Oshman, where we look at current events and trends through a Christian lens. All things were created through Jesus and for Jesus, so we're seeking to apply His word to what's happening here and now.